Right, well, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for attending. My name is Jackie O'Reilly. I'm the current president of SASE, and I'm really pleased to be able to welcome you to the sixth in our series of pre-conference salons. The idea of the salons are very much to help us start thinking about some of the ideas about the conference. That's about fractious connections, anarchism, activism, coordination and control. And this particular session really comes under the theme of activism. This idea of the salons is one to help connect different communities of SASE across the globe for those who either can't or don't want to travel, or are not able, for various reasons, aren't able to join us. And it's also part of the greening of SASE in a way of providing events that don't necessarily incur some of those environmental effects of all the travel. But for those of you who are coming to Amsterdam, we look forward to seeing you. And that's briefly all I'm going to say at the moment. Today's session has very kindly Arlie Hochschild has come to talk about her work, and Glenn Morgan, my esteemed colleague from Bristol University and former president of SASE and author of his new book, Business Elites and Populism, will be moderating the session for us in discussion with Arlie. So Glenn, I'll hand over to you now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Jackie. So welcome everybody. It's a real pleasure to introduce Arlie Hochschild as the SASE Salon speaker. Obviously, Arlie has made many contributions over a number of years to a variety of fields. And in her book, Strangers in Their Own Land, she has given us one of the best introductions to what people who have voted for Trump are thinking about and what their world consists of and how these things go together. And so we're hoping that she'll be able to further enlighten us about that process. That I think the Strangers in Their Own Land book was mainly based in an ethnography in Louisiana, and in her more recent work, as she'll explain, she's also been looking in Appalachia. And so the format will be that Arlie will talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll go into a Q&A session. People are welcome to put into the chat questions. I will then call on people to give their question. We'll unmute the questioners, and we'll see how the discussion goes from there. But I think what we're all here for is to listen to Arlie. So Arlie, if you're ready to kick off, over to you.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Glenn. This is a great pleasure to get to actually discuss a kind of a situation where here in the United States, I believe we are in danger of becoming strangers in our own land. And so what I thought I'd do today in this brief period is talk about first more general forces at work that are dividing our country. And a recent poll said that some third of Americans think there may be violence, whichever way the next presidential vote goes. So there is a very serious division. And secondly, to talk about the right itself as what's turned from a party to a movement, I will argue. And I'll talk about my own research, what's happened since that research from 16 to 22, and then what we might do since we're talking about activism. So let me begin by saying that I think first we should step back and look at the general forces that exacerbate whatever differences are there. And I'd say the first is actually in the United States, a two-party system, which is very different from other systems in that the two parties are not required to make a coalition or to find common ground with other parties. So I think the very political system is something to take for granted, but that is exacerbating the divide we're looking at. The second thing is the growth of the media diversification, that it used to be in the 1960s and 70s. It's always said that the news, everybody had the same source of news, and there would be Walter Cronkite, and he would say, and that's how it is today. So everybody was living in the same overarching bubble of truth, you would say. Not true today, because for its own economic reasons, different sources of media are going for their audiences and drawing their advertising dollars by targeting those audiences. So that is an additional source of division. A third source of division is that a growth of the mass media, Facebook, for example, there is a kind of a giant shaming the system. Each side is looking at what the other side honestly thinks of them and is throwing shame snowballs at each other, which only exacerbate this division. And finally, the fourth and most important source of division is economic. And I think we have to stand back and look at what has happened since the 1970s, when offshoring and globalization and automation took off, that there appeared a split between the winners of globalization and the losers of globalization. And the winners tend to live in cities. They tend to have college educations and live in liberal bubbles. The losers tend to be rural. They tend to be not have a BA, so that difference, that split between the winners and losers, is what's gotten exaggerated. And so I think the rise of the right in the United States, and we could look at Brexit in Britain, we could look at France, I was just talking to someone, a Japanese journalist yesterday, he said it's happening in Japan too, that the rural, poor, blue-collar class was turning to the right. What I think we find is that it is the elite of the left behind who are the most animated, who fit the description. I heard a man say in an interview I did with him, he said, "Oh, Donald Trump, he's lightning in the jar, lightning in the jar." So I think it is and this guy's a small businessman, not doing that well. And he led a vehicle parade 33 miles around Eastern Kentucky of pro-Trump people with flags and honking their horns. So I think what we have to do as social analysts is kind of look at the source of that lightning. And the first thing to say then is that what we're looking at is not the abject poor. It's certainly not the winners of globalization, but it is the elite of the losing sector. And then I think the really poor follow that elite. So those, I think, are the sources of division kind of pushing this this division. Let me now turn to the general state of the right in the United States. We have a Democratic president, but we have a Republican-leaning Congress. We have, that's very lot of lightning in that jar, that are refusing any good news to come from the Democratic president. We have a Republican-controlled, we can say, a Supreme Court. If you look at the majority of American states, state histories, state legislators, the majority are Republican. Those who are controlling the electoral process, majority Republican. And so it looks like the next presidential election, we are in, from my point of view, in danger of becoming strangers, even more than we are strangers in our own land. Who are these people on the right? First, they are 47% of the American voters, so quite substantial. And second, there are more people that, well, backing up. Second, a lot of whites are voting for Donald Trump. And more people actually voted for him after they knew who he was in 2020 than before in 2016. So if we look at the voters in 2020, 58% of whites voted for Donald Trump. 61% of white males voted for Donald Trump. 70% of white males without a BA voted for Donald Trump. And 72% of white males without a BA live in rural areas. So, so that's who I've been studying, and I'm studying them in the South, and where there are 11 states of the old Confederacy who pretty much fit in the electoral sense, the picture that I draw on Louisiana. And now I'm looking at Appalachia. And if we put the 13 states of Greater Appalachia, so we put the South together with Appalachia, we have 2/3 of voter support for Donald Trump. And what do these regions have in common? They have in common a kind of a downward mobility. They are the losers of globalization. And I think that's the most important thing to say. And so when someone like Hillary Clinton talks cheerfully about the American dream, and you just have to work hard and you'll get there, there's a certain part. One young man said, when I heard her talk, I just thought to myself, shut up. You know, I can't make it like that. And so I think there's a basic feeling of it. So 45% is who we're talking to. Let me just briefly recap in case you haven't read The Strangers in Their Own Land. What I did was to climb out of my blue bubble in Berkeley, California, and go to a red bubble in the heart of the Deep South. And I brought with me the red state paradox. How come across the country it is the poorest states, the states with the most car accidents, the worst health, the most polluted environments, the lowest life expectancy, are also the states that get more money from the federal government in aid than they give to it in tax dollars, and revile the federal government. That was I went in thinking, wait a minute, this is very strange. I was very inspired by a book called What's the Matter with Kansas by Thomas Frank. So I was just kind of pausing with that paradox though. And I took my alarm system off, which ethnographic researchers such as myself do, and tried to absorb what people are really feeling through their words. And I went to meetings of Republican women of Southwest Louisiana. I followed 2 Republican candidates through their whistle stops. I followed around an environmentalist who said, oh, a lot of people hate what I do. I asked if I could follow him and talk to his enemies. And so this was a 5-year soak it up kind of a project. And I am now in touch with still a lot of people. They've come to visit me in Berkeley. Oh, look at all the foreign languages going on. Everybody's on their cell phone, different kinds of dogs, all these, recycle bins. They're sort of looking at my life and commenting on it. So that was the Odyssey. And I came away with thinking that in addition to social class and economics, which is very important, there is something that is sometimes equally important, and that is the experience of and the emotional response to loss. Now, we know that there's been experimental work comparing the effect of deprivation and comparing it to the effect of loss. In other words, you have, and experiments been done, a man who, is given very few tokens to, in this experiment to get something he wants. And then you compare him to another man who once had many tokens and lost them. They're economically equivalent, but the guy who lost what he can remember he once had is more likely to seek scapegoats and blame, is just more emotional steam, more electricity in the jar, so to speak, for that second kind of guy. And I am arguing that in addition to looking at economics, we need to really focus on the emotional response to loss and the political right-wing exploitation of that feeling. So I'm trying to move the arrow that we researchers pursue to culture and to the feelings attached to it, and to, in fact, trace down that electricity in the jar. So I would, I think there are, what I did in the book was to propose a metaphor. Metaphors are really important. I think we feel through them, and this comes from an extraordinary book, I think, Metaphors We Live by George Lakoff. And what I did was propose a metaphor of a man who's standing in line, and he is facing the American dream. American dream's ahead of him. It's on a hill. It's unavailable. The line isn't moving. Guy isn't looking at the many more people behind him in line. He's just looking ahead. He feels he's done everything right. He begrudges no one. He's not a prejudiced person, but he's waiting in line. The line hasn't moved. And then he sees line cutters. And they would be Blacks who, through affirmative action authorized by Barack Obama, is cutting ahead. Women, even more of a threat in a way, because more of them, and refugees and immigrants, and even public sector workers who are earning great sums, they feel. So all of these feel like people who are illegitimate in their claims. And there is a notion of a just world. There's a new book out that indicates if people feel that a situation is unjust, they'll focus on that. And that's what's true for this man standing in line. He is the Trump voter. He is upset, angry. And and here's what I would add to that picture. And my new project, I'm just writing it up now, so it's not totally, it's not what I'm talking about here, but there is a sense of he's waiting in line, and what can we add to his mind? He's lost his wages. They're not what they were. His son is going to do worse than he. So he sees himself on a familial downward slope. And if there's intergenerational jobs, like a coal miner whose grandfather was a coal miner, father was a coal miner, he was a coal miner, he lost his job. He also lost his heritage and pride. And a lot of people in Appalachia, but I think it's true in rural areas generally, you're a stayer where other people are leavers. In other words, there's a brain drain going on in middle America, where young people with college educations, they're leaving, they're not coming. And you're staying with the, you don't feel that good. You feel, oh, well, I'm a loser. And in a way, when you do, if you are a leaver in a small town and you want to go to the city and get a better job, high-paying job, you become a little like an immigrant, and you talk funny if you're a hillbilly, you're subject to epithets, and don't have backup, and your human capital is not transferable, because back on the farm or in rural areas, or this goes for the South, it also goes for Appalachia, that you are known, your reputation will rest on how your uncle saw you fix that refrigerator, and your neighbor knows you're really handy at fixing the truck. But you get to the city and there's no neighborhood knowledge of you. You're a local in a land of cosmopolitans. So there is that devaluation of your human capital. So loss upon loss upon loss. And once we know this statistically, that marriages are less stable in blue collar world. So you're less likely to be living with the mother of your child, and less likely to be out there on the baseball diamond coaching. So there are fewer sources of pride. And that if you're low on those kinds of sources of pride, there are other sources of pride you turn to, and that would be race. And why can't we say white pride? Is what I hear. And nationalism, Americanism. So why is the left, I'm hearing, saying we can't be proud of being Americans? Oh, now the Blacks are saying we're born in sin and bringing us down. We're already down in these other ways. So I think we have to keep our eye on loss and the perception of the news through the lens of the guy waiting in line who's also experiencing these losses. Now, let me turn to what's changed since 2016. I think that the story in 2016, as I heard it, was one of we have lost a lot and we want rescue. And you're a guy who understands us, Mr. Trump. We're going to vote for you. So it was a loss story. But I think if that deep story had chapters, we could say that the next chapter was a kind of beatification of Donald Trump. I know this may sound strange, since he's not known as a highly religious person, or as he lived his life according to many religious principles, but he has come as populist, charismatic figure does to this loser, blue-collar, rural, male-centered culture and saying, I am for you. Billionaire that I am for you, and I am your messenger, and you are for me. So come to me, I will be your voice. I hear you, I love you, you love me. And this in a way, it is a way, as in other religious figures, a way of kind of, I will take on your suffering as Jesus did. Now, I know this will seem like a leap, but I'm lifting out an emotional logic that I think is this electricity in the jar, and that many people see him as a religious figure. And so if we look at the rise of the right, we see that it started with the Tea Party. It leapt over to the whole Republican Party. And then in a way, it's leapt out of the Republican Party into what's now called populist Republicans. Talked to a guy who said, oh, there's the country club Republicans and the populist Republicans. I am a populist Republican. And there is now a MAGA movement, which begins with prayer in their meetings. MAGA, Make American Great Again. So, there was recently a very interesting op-ed in the New York Times by Nate Hoffman, in which he argued that actually membership in the evangelical church is declining. And it's as if that religiosity has moved into right-wing politics. It's almost the politicization of religious fervor. So have a look at that. That would be the first chapter after the man standing in line, from loss to I have someone who will regain my loss for me. And then we have another turn, another chapter in that deep story, which is turning lost to stolen. And there are, again, if we think of a metaphor, it has a lot of layers because they feel a lot of things have been that are lost. Hey, they could be stolen. We have someone to blame. And that's very much where we are. And for many, it is the government itself, which is, as well as its supporters, is the thief, and we're in the middle of lost to stolen. We are now in stolen. A third of Americans, and that includes Republicans and Democrats, don't believe that Joe Biden, for all the evidence, was actually legitimately elected. This is where we are, and I think we do have to look at this through a religious frame now. I'll give you a few examples of from my new work, but leaving most of it out. But I met a man who had lost his job in the coal industry. He was a miner, lost his job. And then he got injured in the job, and he took pain relievers, one called OxyContin, which is as strong as heroin, and he got hooked. And many in rural blue-collar Trump country, this is where opiates where opiate companies like Purdue Pharma have targeted the under-regulated rural areas and peddling. This is white-collar crime. Anyway, this man became hooked. Then he lost his marriage. Then he lost his custody of his children, visiting privileges. And he really was at the bottom, in a recovery program. And he said, when Donald Trump came to town, and he said, oh, I'm going to bring back coal, I knew he was lying, he said, but I felt like he saw who I was. And I voted for him. 4 years later, there are no more coal jobs. The environment isn't any cleaner. In fact, those regulations were dropped under Trump. All of the material things are no better, but this man felt given something else, an answer to the losses he felt as he's standing in line that won't move. So that, I think, is a chapter that brings us up to date. And it's a frightening chapter. I think that we now have to talk about what the left is doing. And is it doing, what is it doing? Well, in the United States, I think President Biden has put forward some great ideas, policies. He doesn't have a public face that one can project these needs onto and feel defended or led, and that people are in a, what I would call psychologically regressed state that is more childlike. They've been hit with COVID, they've been hit with, these are extra political events that have made people nervous and anxious. They've been hit by fires and floods, and climate change looks like it's not just a left-wing myth. It's real, it's coming, and it's hitting us. Lake Charles, which was in Louisiana, the site of my study, is devastated, you know, and cleanup's is very slow. They're thinking of it as an act of God, but others are talking about climate, and they're hearing more about that. So is the left really responding? I would say no, that much of what's that people are not feeling the call of those policies, emotionally speaking. And much of the left is putting salt in the wounds by insults. When Joe mentioned of the senator from West Virginia refused to be the final vote that would have given us a fantastic set of Build Back Better Biden money and proposal, would have turned that into law. Bette Midler said, oh, West Virginia, people that voted for Joe Manchin are, you know, just a bunch of hillbillies and unemployed and strung out. They are unemployed and strung out. That's true. But you don't need a left elitist person to tell them that. So there's the salt in the wound figure. And I'd love to see more research on something else, which is that one study indicated that when you look at what the left knows about the right, what do Democrats think Republicans think, and you compare it to what Republicans think Democrats think, you find that the Democrats are way more off. They're less good predictors about what the right thinks. If you say, once in this study, you know, how many Republicans do you think don't think race is a problem in America now? And the Democrats said, oh, that'll be 80% of Republicans don't want to worry about race. See if I have this right. But actually, it's something like 80% think, yeah, race is a real problem. And so why are, and then education doesn't make the left be any better as a predictor of what the right thinks than uneducation. In other words, people with advanced degrees are not better at predicting in either party, Democrat or Republican. Very educated people are not better at predicting than less educated people. But among Democrats, it's actually worse. The more education, the less good you are at predicting. And scratching my head, I did a piece for the Guardian on this about it. I found that the highly educated Democrats are much more likely to live in cities and, you know, be enclaved. It's not that they're less interested or stupid, but they are more bubbled. So that is another way in which we're splitting apart. And the left is not making a project of trying to even get what the thinking is and what we need to do to stop the prospect of becoming strangers in our own land. So what I think is called for is more communication across lines. I think there actually is in the civic sector of the United States quite a lot going on. Among the people that I'm talking to, there are a lot of people who actually are interested. They're Republican, but not fire-breathing, and they used to be Democrats. See, this is a whole loss. With the loss of unions, there's a loss of the Democratic Party, and there are a lot of people who remember the old days and feel some affection. So I think the left needs to take that seriously as an opportunity, and that at each level there needs to be a reach out. So let me actually stop there, and maybe we can, Glenn, you can perhaps guide us in opening out a discussion on this, including your own work.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Arlie, for that very eloquent presentation of what's going on. I'd urge people to start to put some questions in the chat, and I'll turn to them in a minute. I guess I just want to follow up a couple of things. You haven't specifically talked about the January the 6th events with regard to the Capitol. I wonder, you know, where you see this as going. I'm just reading a book, might have seen it, How Civil Wars Start, by Barbara Walter, in which she talks about the US being close to civil war. I mean, she's not describing civil war in the way of the 1860s, but talking about the emergence of civil war. And those events on January the 6th were obviously deeply shocking to many people. Do they still, in your mind, revolve around this metaphor of something that's been stolen? And what lengths will people go to take back what has been stolen when it becomes represented in the Congress and in presidential elections and that type of thing? That would be, yeah. I mean, maybe you want to respond to that, and then I'll look for other people in the chat.
Yeah, you know, in response to January 6th, the people I've been talking to had a variety of early responses. The first early response was, oh no, that's Antifa, that's not really us, these are not Trump supporters, these are outside agitators pretending to be Trump supporters. Then when it appeared, no, these are these are Trump supporters. Then I often heard it's not serious. The metaphor was a football game. Guys would just kind of get too excited about the team, and then they would try and climb the fence. And the January 6th was like overexcited footballers. And that was the metaphor, as if to say not that serious. And then in a way, there was a bifurcation between people who said, oh, we really messed up, and that wasn't good. And others who said, well, it was good, and there must be, and then it was kind of a hardening and a growth of paranoia. So people would say, okay, it wasn't as serious as the left is telling us, but we did mess up. There was that side. And I talked to a mayor of Coal Run, and he said, well, at Facebook page, I'm just not seeing many defenders of January 6th, fewer and fewer, they're quieter. But at the same time, there were people whose perspective hardened, and it hardened this way. People would say, oh, look, I would have gone to Washington. I wouldn't have, broken in, but, make America great. I believe in that. And, but look now, all the FBI posters up, and I better take my Facebook page down. And they're coming after us, Big Brother state, and they're going to arrest us. And there's a sense of we're being criminalized. Now, we've lost all these things, and now we're losing our dignity as citizens, as Americans, and that is the ultimate identity, fallback identity. So there was a certain paranoia, and I asked to talk to people who had gone to Washington, and I didn't get answers back. And some guy said, well, they're afraid to talk to you. And they're being indicted. And I've studied some of the indictments, and the response is very different. Some are saying, look, I'm sorry I did this. I like the footballer, I got too caught up. But I see it serious now. And others are kind of defiant, and as if there is some pride in defying big bad government. And so it's as if, seeking pride and then being brought down as the criminal. There's a desire to look sideways, blame others, both the authority that's criminalizing you and saying, look at all the damage wreaked in Portland, Oregon by those Black Lives Matter people. How come they aren't criminalized? They're not being shamed the way we are. So it goes that way. And then who's in charge of this government? Maybe it's Q, maybe it's an alien state. And so genuinely paranoid people that I talk to would be preface, well, I'm not paranoid, but, and then they would say, but who's running this show? So January 6th, as you probably know, Fox News is not running the hearings that are going on now, like all the other stations. It's in a way, trying to be like the guy who said, well, they were just overexcited footballers that were rooting for their team, not really criminals, heroes.
So there is a question on the chat actually about the congressional hearings. Do you expect that, this is from Akash, do you expect that these hearings will make things worse, will polarize people more, and not get anywhere? Or what do you think will be the outcome of this?
That's a very good question. The right-wing media is steering people away from the idea of taking this seriously. I have a sinking feeling that the guys who are not taking it seriously, or who are finding some heroism in this act of breaking out, I don't think they're being taken seriously. I don't think it's going to help. That's my honest just take. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, Arlie, thanks. Well, I'll move on to some of the questions in the chat then. First one that comes up is Eva Hartman. Eva, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
I'm coming in. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thanks for this really insightful presentation. I mean, the question was about, you mentioned the ideal type white man in the rural area feels basically sidelined, and also feels like the affirmative action is not in his advantage. I think the more general question that is actually part of my question is, I mean, affirmative action is a kind of state-imposed attempt to address inequality. And I was just wondering what kind of mechanisms are in place, or lack being in place in a rural context, that could help to mitigate or mediate or address inequality. So that was a bit because I would relate affirmative action very much to an urban area, but I might be mistaken. So I just thought like there was you brought them together, and I thought they might be different, two different things. And if they're different, then the question would be what kind of mechanisms are in place or are not in place in the rural area that could address inequality. It doesn't have to be racial inequality, all kinds of inequality, but maybe also racial inequality, but not legalized.
That's a great question. And affirmative action actually has, through the petrochemical industry, at least as an ideology, permeated. And I talked to one white pipe fitter in Westlake, right next to Lake Charles, in this huge petrochemical complex. He said, "Oh, they want half of pipe fitters to be women now, and I can't pass on my job to my son. This is what the government is imposing." Well, is it going to do that? I don't know, but that it's important for us that the man thinks that's it's a big job blocker for him. And when automation is kind of eating away at those jobs anyway, it seems like two things are eating away at his economic security. But I think the big thing to look at is labor unions. That used to be the big racial mixer and lifter of the poor into a substantial blue collar elite position. And labor unions, we're down to 9% in the private sector. And I think the reason for that, to go back, is from the 70s on, in a way, capitalism flew the coop, and the two brakes on capitalism, labor unions and the government, federal government, were helpless to, or it didn't stop offshoring, which was, and capitalism got to have its way. So it doesn't care about equality. We have to care about it. So I think that's the fix that we're in. And there is some labor activism going on right now with Amazon, for example, which I think there needs to be more of. But yeah, now racial equality is seen as the tool of the top of these pointy-headed, policy analysts and the urban elite to keep them down. That's how they are seeing it.
Thank you so much. Very interesting.
Okay, thanks very much. Getting quite a few questions now. Graham Hill, are you still online? Would you like to ask your question to Arlie?
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks very much. And thank you, Arlie, for fascinating discussion. I was curious to hear more about the sort of organizational difference that you're seeing in the study you did for Strangers in Their Own Land and the work that you're currently doing. In Strangers in Their Own Land, you're able to sort of locate this and sort of study this as part of the Tea Party. And that sort of organization no longer exists. And there's not really as far as I'm aware, a sort of contemporary equivalent. And you talked about sort of locating or understanding what the sort of work that what you're studying now in terms of the MAGA movement. I'd be curious to hear more about what that entails, but it seems just like the organization of sort of right-wing populism is much more diffuse, much more fragmented than it was for your first book. And I was curious what difference that makes, both for the sort of right-wing populist politics itself, but also for attempting to study it and trying to, especially an ethnographic study, that it's sort of locating it and sort of situating it in some sort of bigger national context.
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts of your question. I like it very much. And it's kind of what I've had to be dealing with. You're absolutely right. This is more fragmented, I think. But at the center of this fragmentation is this behind the scenes, still very powerful Donald Trump. And what he calls now a movement, a MAGA movement. So when so how do I do it? What I'm doing is a different thing this time. And I'm just this summer writing all this up. So it's not ready yet. But what I'm doing is taking a town that's pushed the furthest right than all of Kentucky. It's Pikeville, and the rest of Kentucky has pushed farther right than the rest of the country. So, and these are, it's a very hard hit town. Coal jobs have left, and opiates, big time, still a problem. It's not letting up, are in, and they are down on their heels. And then I learned of a white nationalist march that was coming to town. And I thought, holy shit, excuse my language, but this is a perfect storm. And will they go for it? And then I've done a rational, and I've interviewed top, town fathers and so on. And the bottom, I'm interviewing prisoners in a prisoner release program and recovering addicts, because there's a ruralification of prisons now as a job opportunity. So they're taking prisons and putting them in these rural areas. I'm counting them. They can't vote, but they're there. So top to bottom and side to side. And I just am knocking on doors, teachers, ex-coal miners, people working in black lung clinics, just that way. It's, again, it's snowballing is what we call it, but theoretically around the appeal, the vulnerability to the appeal of this guy. And I've interviewed him. He's a neo-Nazi. And I do it in a hotel room, public space. I didn't, but he's quite a character. So that is my strategy this time. I'm looking at race, which I didn't so much, and strangers. How do you feel about race? And yeah.
Great, thanks.
I think there's a question from Lon Campbell about race. Lon, are you still online? Can you summarize your question?
Hi, that's me.
Yeah.
What I was asking, hi Arlie, was basically the extent to which you think that the motivation to vote for Donald Trump is about economic inequality or racial animosity. There was a lot of discussion after the 2016 election about how it was really racial animosity and xenophobia. And then other people argued, no, it's really economic inequality. And so I'm just curious if you think it's more one or the other, or if there's some type of feedback there.
This is the $64,000 question, I think, and I don't have a neat answer, but race is definitely there. And so I don't think this is all economic, or is it half and half? Would the talk of race and, critical race theory, for example, they don't like the word critical. They don't like the word race. They don't like theory. I mean, that means it's highfalutin, academic kind of stuff. And so in a way the race thing has come to conflate with their distrust of government. The government is forcing us. We're nice people. We're not racist. I hear that every interview. I'm not a racist person. No, the left people are, dinging everyone left, right, center. But no, I'm not racist. But the government is forcing our children to not be proud of America. If pride is being stolen. So it takes various forms, and it always, whatever form it takes, it goes back to this loss story, I think, which they feel is unaddressed. Yeah. So I'm sorry that I'm talking around a real answer, which I don't have. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Arlie. So Nina, you had a question, and then after that, Gerhard. So Nina, if you want to do your question, still online.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, Arlie. Really good.
Hi.
Thank you to be our guest and friend here in the SASE community. Because we have such a rare opportunity to talk to a foremost expert in emotions, I had a question about the role of emotions. I had two questions, actually. I'll start with my second one very briefly. And that is, you mentioned, the feeling of loss, and you cited an experiment that's based in cognitive psychology, Kahneman and Tversky. But I wonder whether there's social forces about emotions at stake here too. And that is the legitimization of emotional response as the way in which we proceed and act and behave these days. That might be different from other times. I don't know if you have any thoughts related to that, sort of the new emotional culture of today in some ways. That's my first one. And then second one really quickly is just this fascination in how a man standing in line is aggrieved by cutters, but it seems admires those who rise to wealth very quickly. So extreme wealth inequality is not a bother. Skyscraper being built and a person escalating to their echelons in the penthouse, that's being admired, it seems. But a person is aggrieved by cutters who are, really just the same, a peer person as themselves. So I wondered about, reaction to extreme wealth inequality, but first about the emotional culture. Thank you.
Yeah. Wonderful to see you. It's great. And fantastic questions. My word for legitimation in this realm is feeling rules about what it's a good thing to feel or a bad thing to feel. And there are big differences. You're completely onto something here. In the culture of the right and culture and feeling rules of the left. When, for example, this is pretty well known, that people that I'm talking to actually in both places, but especially in Appalachia, are Stoics. They take pride in being able to take the hit and get back up. And they are minimizing hurt, being brave, being soldierly. So, and not feeling sorry for themselves. So the feeling rules say, don't be sad, don't feel weak, try to be strong, and try and be positive. The effort, the emotional work, from my point of view, of trying to lift up is much valued. And in communities where the whole community is in mourning for the loss of coal jobs, it's like funereal. One guy said, yeah, it feels like a funeral around here, Turkey Creek, we've all lost our jobs. So there's a kind of a stiff upper lip. And then they feel dissed for all of the effort it took to be that brave. They feel either it's not seen or it's not valued because, those lefts, they're all so soft. They don't value stamina and strength and perseverance. They need trigger warnings. They're soft. They're female, and we're male, and even the women here are male because many men get injured, and it's the women who are carrying the family forward. So they have this stiff upper lip ethic too. So very different political divide between two sets of feeling rules. So love that question. Did you ask something else? Did I go off to, I think that was it.
Yeah. That's okay. There are many questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Arlie. Thanks, Nina. Gerhard, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Arlie, for a fascinating talk. I'm not sure if I can frame my question in a meaningful, short way, but what I'm sort of intrigued by is what you said about the economic sources of division, and you started off by saying, offshoring and all that. So I work on Central Eastern Europe, Hungary, Poland, and these sort of countries, and with Daniel, who is also here. And like, there's a new sort of explanation in a sense of, or debate, I should say, whether the rise of the right, populist right, is that a reaction, a rejection of liberalism? And it sounded like you were making that argument to some extent. It's a reaction to, the liberalism, the neoliberalism of the 80s, offshoring and so forth. Whereas obviously the situation in East Central Europe is quite different in terms of these countries were, had FDI inflows, re-industrialization through open borders and so forth. And which I guess may explain why some authors working in these areas say, the rise of the right is not a reaction to liberalism, even though they call themselves illiberals. What it is new ways in which capital exploits labor. So it's sort of the same goal as neoliberalism had, as by Harvey's explanation. It's subjugating of the working classes to capital, but populism is sort of a new way of achieving that through a discourse that mixes up the alliances, the coalitions, and so rather than a revolt, and I think you mentioned, like the elite of the left behind, and I think this interpretation would reject that view and would say, well, no, this is, it's a faction of the elite of the winners, right? And the UK case would sort of support that. We had Farage, we had Johnson, who are by no means sort of working class heroes. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on this sort of, maybe I'm talking about the class aspects of this populist rise of the right, whether it has, really, whether it is an extension of what's happened since the 80s or a reaction to it. Maybe that's the simple way of putting it. So sorry for a long-winded way.
Yeah, I'm just trying to follow what I think you're saying. You're looking for a social class explanation.
Yes. I mean, the simple way of putting it perhaps is this a phenomenon driven by, a faction of capital that is not part of the left behind group? So it's an instrumentalization of the working class,
sure.
as opposed
of course.
to,
of course.
And if you agree with that, then I'm not sure I understood what you said about, the elite of the left behind driving this.
I see. Now I get it. Yes. Oh, well, of course. Yes. There is the 1%, the Koch brothers, the Trump himself, all the billionaires. I'm not forgetting them. I'm looking at their appeal to regular people. And what they're trying to do, I think, is how I would put it. I'm not focusing on the elite, but the elite are there. I should have mentioned it. That what people, the Trump, clearly in his first 4 years, gave billions of dollars to already rich people. We know this, and this is coincides with his "I know how you feel" appeal to the working class. And I think what he is trying to pull off, if I were to summarize it, is to give to keep the 1% happy, to give them more, while giving the people cultural answers to their economic distress. He's trying to have it both ways.
Yeah, if I can come in here and give a brief plug to the book that a number of us in this audience have been working on, which is on the relationship between business and populism. What we find is a lot of quite a degree of variation in terms of the degree to which populist leaders do articulate what Boris Johnson talks about in terms of leveling up. In other words, they are the degree to which they articulate about bringing back manufacturing from China, the degree to which they talk about improving infrastructure and education on the one hand, and on the other hand, as you said, Arlie, giving big tax breaks to the wealthiest in society. But I mean, the other thing from business's point of view is that populism creates a noisy politics. It creates a situation of disruption where you don't know what's happening, where business feels a lot of uncertainty in that context. So one of the things that I would add to your perspective in terms of how do things go forward from here would be about, at what point will business actually, or has business intervened and said, well, crudely speaking, enough is enough, and some of the things that are being proposed and the way that politics is going and the divisions, the conflicts that are being created within societies and in geopolitical terms as well. One of the things we're trying to look at is how business is responding to this noisy politics that is created by the conjuncture of populist leaders like Trump, for whom performance is all, and the contrast between that and how business would much prefer to be able to engage in what Culpeper calls quiet politics. And so there's another actor in here that we haven't heard very much about. When they try and raise their heads, business, for example, in Brexit, in the Brexit phenomenon, were told to, excuse my language, basically fuck off as far as Boris Johnson was concerned. He wasn't interested in what business said. Anyway, just a brief plug for a book that is not yet out, but hopefully will be in the next few months. I've got Nancy. I think you've got a big question there, going back to the race theme that maybe Arlie would like to respond to. So Nancy.
Hi, I was mentioning that in my book on the American non-dilemma, Racial Inequality Without Racism, I tried to show that by framing these political issues around racism or racists, it essentially was a way for the educated elites to distance themselves from racial issues and believe that they are not racist and doesn't have anything to do with racism, while blaming the white working class for their racism. Yeah. But both groups in my study, both the educated elites or educated people and the working class, found their jobs primarily by having friends or relatives help them get an inside edge to a job. And so in both cases, it was really about whites helping other whites to maintain their economic privilege, but by framing it as racism, as opposed to racial inequality, again, it allowed those who were educated to not see how they were participating in maintaining racial inequality. And of course, it made working class people very angry because they were both being called racist, and that for them, their economic vulnerability was very substantial, because having a decent life for them meant getting one of those jobs where they got an inside edge because a family member or a friend helped them get into that company. And if that got interrupted for them, they had no options because they didn't have the skills or the marketable credentials to go and find a comparable job. And so for them, the contrast was between a decent life and poverty. For the educated groups, who surprisingly were not opposed to affirmative action in the same way that I would have expected, if they lost their job because of one of these things, they did have marketable skills and their kids were educated, so they weren't vulnerable in the same way. And then the final thing about this is that what was the final thing about it? Oh, yes, that I interviewed people and got information on almost 1,500 jobs that people got in terms of what happened and who helped them and so on. Of these 1,500 jobs, when I asked them, have you ever been discriminated against? There were only 5 examples that could possibly have been interpreted as somehow a Black took a job that a white might have wanted. 5 out of 1,500. So the issue of affirmative action had no reality whatsoever in the lives of these white people that I interviewed.
Yeah. Wow, Nancy, that sounds amazing. And I definitely want to check your book out. Yeah. It's a very, it rings true. It really rings true. Yeah. And yeah, a lot of white neighborhoods here in Berkeley with Black Lives Matter sign, you know, but white large houses. So, you know, interesting.
So I think we're nearing the end of the session probably. And I'm sorry that I haven't been able to include everybody who's put questions on the link, but maybe Arlie could have a look at them when she's got a chance and see if she can respond. But Arlie, have you got any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Well, one final thought is your own book sounds really important and interesting. And that is a missing perspective, I think, in the research we've got of if business wants steadiness to do its, you know, it doesn't like disruption. And then you have Donald Trump giving a talk in front of the National Rifle Association saying this is the base of our movement. I would think business would say, oh my God, let's get back to the old norm. So quiet politics, as you called it. So
I think we're a long way from that.
Yes, we are going the other way. Anyway, it's wonderful to get to see you. Those of you I've had a chance to meet, and let's all do our work on this issue. I guess either looking at the elite side of this, which was brought up in one question, or the follower side. Good luck to you in your work.
Thanks very much, Arlie. Jackie, do you want to say anything at the end?
Yeah, can I have the last word? Well, first of all, 2 last words, but they'll be longer than 1 word each. First of all, can I thank Arlie and Glenn for managing this session? And can I also thank the audience, because it's just absolutely lovely. It feels really like a salon, although you might be different times of day. It'll be morning in California, evening in Europe, and nighttime in Asia. But it's just, I found it enormously enriching. And the reason I wanted to invite Arlie was very much this idea of looking at the storming of the Capitol because of the concept of fractious connections that we're working on. So what is it that holds people together, i.e. the rules of the Constitution? So the references that you've given, Glenn and others, are really interesting books. So what are the rules that hold us together, and what are the norms and values that hold us together, or the senses of injustice that make us say the rules of the game aren't fair? Essentially, that's the idea I want to develop. And I think, you know, the work all of you doing is really very, very helpful on that. So thank you for that.